Good morning, and welcome to PPTA's Election 2020 Wrap-Up. I'm Tom Lilburn. I'm the Senior Director of Government Relations, and today we're going to go through the results of the 2020 election, both in the Senate and the House and the presidential election. Joining me is Tim Swope. Tim is the Manager of Government Relations for PPTA, and also joining us is George Olsen, president of Williams and Jensen, who is an acknowledged Hill expert and policy expert on healthcare. With that, we want to get right into it and start talking about some of the results and some of the impacts that it will have on PPTA and its membership. So Tim, if you'll start us off just speaking a little bit about the presidential election.
Sure thing, Tom. So as of this moment, the Associated Press has called the election for former Vice President Joe Biden with 290 electoral votes called, with including the races called for Pennsylvania and Arizona. Mm-hmm. And there are still remaining 28 electoral votes outstanding from the races in Georgia, North Carolina, and Alaska. But obviously, those 28 would not be enough for President Trump to overtake the lead that the AP is projecting for Vice President Biden. So it is expected that with the highest turnout since 1900, that the presidential race will go to Joe Biden and Democrats.
Okay. George, if you'd like to make a few comments on the presidential race and a little bit maybe about the uncertainty that's been thrown into it.
Sure. Well, it's no secret that the president has declined to concede at this point, and the expectation is that if he ever does so, it won't be for quite some time. Instead, he has persisted in his claims that many of these state actions were fraudulent, that a lot of the votes were erroneously provided. Apparently, they're going to go into a campaign-style mode where they're doing campaign events built around the litigation in the various states. They'll do things like hold up copies of death certificates or death notices in the paper for people that presumably voted in some of the states. His staff reports that he is insistent on seeing the legal challenges through. Right now, he is getting some support, perhaps a little tepid, from many of the Republican members of Congress, although there are members who are stepping up and towing his line. In any event, people expect this to drag out for weeks before there is a final resolution. One thing that is important is there is something called the Presidential Transition Act. And this is an act which is permits members of the president-elect's transition team to come in and to the various agencies and start establishing transition plans. There's also some funding, I think it's $6 million, to help them do that. All of that is contingent upon the GSA making a determination that the election is complete, if you will. And the head of the GSA is a Trump appointee. So that's just another factor here, probably going more towards the efficiency of the transition than anything to do with the ultimate disposition of the election. I think by and large, the belief is that the president's litigation efforts are for naught, and that ultimately, as Tim indicated, Biden will be the president.
Okay. I'd say that I certainly agree with you, George, that um, the end result will be that Joe Biden will be the president and will be inaugurated. But it's going to be a rough couple of weeks here as the country gets whipsawed back and forth. Um, you know, one of the things that has to be done is each one of the states, Secretary of States, have to certify the results. Those certificates then have to be in, I think, by December 8th. And then by the December 14th, the electors vote in the Electoral College. And those are the official results that are then taken up to the Senate president and delivered as ascertaining who has won the presidency. So there is some time in between here. We saw back in 2000 with Gore and with Bush, it took 37 days to resolve one state recount with the hanging chads. So if we've got multiple states doing recounts and lawsuits across the country, I think it's going to be a long haul for the American public as we get through this. If we all kind of come to the agreement that it looks like, and we plan at this point for a Biden administration, perhaps we turn for some comments on the Senate, where all those races are not done. George, you want to talk a little bit about the Georgia race and how that's going to impact?
Sure. Assuming, and I don't know that they've done it yet, that Alaska and North Carolina both call their elections and expected it will be for the Republican Senate candidates. That would give the Republicans a 50 to 48 margin in the Senate, with two races undecided and going to a runoff on January 5th.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those races are in Georgia. Loeffler and Warnock, and Perdue and Ossoff. I think the expectation is that the Republicans will prevail in both of those races, but that's not a dead bang cinch. You can expect that huge dollars will pour into that Georgia race. There's been some speculation that it could be the first $1 billion Senate race, because control of the Senate will turn on that. Should the Democrats take both of those seats, it becomes a 50-50 tie with the Vice President, Harris, casting the deciding vote. If it's split, then it becomes a 51-49, with the Republicans having a very, very slim margin. The long and short of it is no matter how that Georgia races play out, we're probably looking at some prolonged and very severe gridlock in Congress.
Sure. Tim?
And I agree with that. The only thing that I would say is that, at the moment, Joe Biden is leading in Georgia by 10,000 votes. So just putting it out there that there's the possibility that there's enough Democratic votes for especially, Stacey Abrams and the kind of organizations and other things trying to pour to end $1 billion. So, I think it's going to be a very tenuous fight, and it's going to be very close. So with that could mean that both seats go to Democrats, and then it's a 50-50 tie. And then, the Vice President Harris situation, if, again, the presidential election is called for the Democrats. So that would mean full Democratic control of the House, Senate, and presidency in that scenario. But that's to be determined, obviously.
I'll throw in that if you look at the polls back just prior to the Georgia elections, Warnoff was leading by leaps and bounds over Loeffler. I think what we could see is a split. We could see one Democrat and one Republican, with Perdue taking it on the Republican side. And then again, we've got the gridlock situation of Republican majority in the Senate. And what that may mean, certainly, is that large things that the House passes and the Senate then has to take up, Mitch McConnell has the opportunity as majority leader not to even put it to a vote on the floor on most things. That being the case, you're going to see, I think, a lot of pressure put on some of those Republicans to move their votes over. If you have a 1 or 2 vote majority in the Senate, pressure becomes intense on some of the people who kind of straddle the fence on the Republican side to move on over. Certainly things like that can happen on the Democratic side of the Senate too. But when you have a narrow majority, it doesn't mean you're going to win the vote on each and every case.
Right.
Big things like the votes on the Supreme Court, they try to stick together. But other things are kind of interesting. I was going to ask, in the Senate, which did you think, George and then Tim, was a surprise for you that you didn't expect? George?
Well, I guess maybe I was sucked in by some of the polling that has turned out to be incredibly erroneous. My thinking was that Democrats would take a narrow majority in the Senate. So I was kind of surprised, actually, that that didn't materialize. And perhaps a bigger picture is the expected blue wave never materialized. It wasn't even a trickle. It was more like a blue ebb tide over in the House, which of course is going to have, or potentially could have, some ramifications for Speaker Pelosi's power and prestige as a leader in the House.
Tim, something that was surprising for you?
I would say Senator Collins' race in Maine. I was, as George noted on the polls, expecting that might flip, and also would echo his little bit of surprise on the House side that it seemed that might be the case. But I would go back again to the fact that both sides, Republicans and Democrats, really had such a great turnout that some of the expectations kind of it got narrower, and we haven't. And I think that the vote reflected that. But yeah, I would say that Susan Collins was the one race that surprised me that it did not flip.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with you that Susan Collins, to me, was surprising. I had mentally kind of checked her off as losing. So on election night, I was surprised when she had as good a showing as she did. Any other thoughts on the Senate before we move on just to look at the House races? Okay. Tim?
One more note.
Sure.
If on the Senate, if it is going to be a Vice President Harris, then there would obviously be a special election. So for California, key state for trade association, there might be a new relationship there. So just noting that.
Absolutely. I think we can be sure that it's probably going to be a Democratic senator. And the list that I've seen is long and extensive of possible candidates coming out of California. George?
Well, the one other note that I would make is that until we get past the runoff elections January 5th, the Senate really can't organize. around the committee assignments, who will be the chair, who will be the ranking member, and indeed the committee ratios. So that will delay somewhat the ability of key committees, Senate Help, for example, to figure out, who's in charge and who's on the committee.
Actually, perhaps this is a good point to stop and talk a little bit about committee leadership and how we think that may change. And we'll look at the Senate first. In the Senate, the two committees that the three of us deal with probably the most are Senate Finance and Senate Help, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the Senate Help Committee. Tim, any thoughts on leadership changes there?
Maybe we should start with George there. Sorry.
Go ahead, George.
Well, I think we have to look at the Senate Help Committee first, because Chairman Alexander won't be around. But then you get to this question, okay, who's going to chair it? Does Patty Murray then step up and become the chair, or does she still say ranking? I mean, we can kind of play those games a lot. But in the absence of that Georgia decision, it's just that. It's, sort of assigning people to roles. And you just don't know what's going to happen in the interim in terms of other opportunities that members may have with other committees and the like. I believe that Grassley's got to step down in finance. So, that moves somebody that has had an awful lot to say about the pharmaceutical industry out of the chairmanship. Then I think it would probably be Crapo would be one possibility to move up, assuming that the Republicans maintain control. And Crapo has, I think, generally not been as strident as Grassley with respect to the pharmaceutical industry.
And I was turning to George because, George, if it remained Republican hold, would the Help Committee then go to Enzi? No.
Enzi is retiring, right?
Yeah. So who would the Help? Who would it go down to then? Is a question. Would it go down to Burr or further down? Rand Paul?
Burr's got his own issues, as does Rand Paul. And that's why I say, Tim and Tom, I mean, you can sort of play these games, but particularly with that committee, you get really attenuated in your thinking when you start going down that list that's on the Republican side.
So it's just a possibility out there that it could be a Rand Paul-led Help Committee, which obviously would be a very big switch from Lamar Alexander.
Yeah, I mean, then you get into the question of how strongly would Republicans adhere to seniority. We know that there have been instances where they've departed from it because they didn't want a particular member chairing a committee. So do we see a reprise of that or not? We just don't know.
Yeah, I think having a physician on the health side would be an interesting change, certainly in the Help Committee. But there are a lot of interim battles that are going to be done between now and that January time. And as both of you have noted, with the uncertainty that exists on the Senate side, a lot of those decisions are going to be fought between now and then behind the scenes. And those are not public decisions that are going to be made. So we'll have to put that one on hold, I guess. let's move to the House just quickly and talk about what went on during the elections there, and in particular, what went on in the membership of the House. It's going to affect our members of PPTA. House right now, I believe the Associated Press is calling it 215 to 196 for the Democrats. Some races still yet to be called. But again, we have some that we know that the Democrats are going to be in the majority. I believe that Speaker Pelosi will continue to be Speaker, whether or not challenges are made at this point. She has been able to beat those challenges back each time. There's been an election for Speaker on the Democratic side. She is the #1 fundraiser in the House, and that means a lot. And that's going to mean a lot to be able to have those funds moving forward. The House has an election in 2 years, and they want to make sure that they can keep that majority. I think, and I've actually heard Mrs. Pelosi in an interview recently say that she would say that it was a bad turnout for the House, but it's not what they expected. Tim, you want to talk a little bit about the House races, and in particular, then take a minute to talk about the ones where we've seen some changes for our membership PPTA.
Right. So yeah, on the big picture scale, it looks like they're projecting that it will be a House lead for the Democrats, that they will still have the majority. But going quickly through some races where our members have facilities in, and this would be the large brick and mortar facilities. So I'll start off with California and go by state. So California, the race for Adam Schiff has been called. He will retain his seat. Dianne Feinstein is not up and she'll stay. And there will be the special election for the Harris seat if it is a Biden presidency. And so next area that we're looking at would be the Jimmy Gomez district seat. This is a hold for that district in Los Angeles, and same Senate races I just noted. Next, going to Florida, where member has a facility in Boca Raton. That is a hold for Democrats, Ted Deutsch, and the Senate seats there were not up this cycle, so Senator Rubio and Senator Scott will remain in office. Next, moving to Georgia, where we have the Senate seats that are up in the air and to be determined, but the hold for the seat in Social Circle, Georgia, for Jody Heiss. Next, moving to Illinois, where this is a clean hold for the Democrats. Robin Kelly, who's been active on a number of issues related to our members and stakeholders, Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, senators that retaining their seats. Next, we have North Carolina, where Representative George Holding has retired, and this seat has now flipped to the Democrats. Deborah Ross, Democrat from North Carolina, and just to note that her priorities include lower the cost of prescription drugs. And there's another seat on the Senate side that's still outstanding in Senator Tillis, where he leads by 95,000 votes, but the vote is not officially called for Senator Tillis to retain his seat in North Carolina. And Senator Burr will retain his seat. And finally, we have New York, where member has a facility in Melville, New York, and that seat is currently held by Thomas Suozzi, Democrat, but at the moment it is led by Republican Santos by 4,000 votes. but there are 90,000 absentees to be counted. And so the party makeup of that makes it project like it may go back to the Democrats, but that's of course to be determined. This is a district where there is a very large independent vote. So just as a historical record, last time Swazi won by 2 points. So this will probably be another very close election. So any questions on those races that are somewhat determined?
And it seems like Mr. Holdings' change was the major one for the industry. Would you say that that's true?
Right. Yeah. And so the with his relationship there, and yeah, so the North Carolina change and the Georgia changes, I think, would be the major pieces that we'll have to build relationships there or rebuild them.
Okay. George, any thoughts on the House?
Yeah, let me go big picture with respect to the House and just some things to watch out for. The polls had created this great expectation among Democratic House members and candidates that they would expand their majority in the House. That did not happen. So one thing that we should keep our eyes out for is what impact will this have on Speaker Pelosi? Not that she won't continue to be the Speaker, but in terms of the power and prestige that she possesses as the Speaker. Secondly, and this is almost the opposite side of the coin, Republicans going into the House elections were looking at the polls as well, and they were seeing and believed that this tidal wave was coming as well. It didn't materialize. And so while they didn't take control of the House, they actually picked up seats. And I think we'll need to watch to see how emboldened this has made House Republicans and whether it affects the ardor with which they pursue various objectives in the House. Third thing to watch is the Speaker's ability to navigate between sort of the more moderate centrist members of her party and the progressives, the AOCA and the Squad, who I think believe that they are responsible in part for Biden's election. So how does she keep those two vastly different wings of her caucus pulling the oars in the same direction? And of course, finally, without an enlargement of the House Democratic caucus, and remains to see how significant this will be, but it could have an impact on the committee ratios as well. So those are the four sort of bigger picture things that I'd keep our eyes on as far as the House is concerned.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would echo that. So that's, the pendulum swing of the moderate seats and, those centrist Democrats that, really need to have more of a moderate line to maintain their seats. And, so I think that's going to be a key thing to watch as far as like the Connor Lambs and the other Democrats that there's the possibility that, as this margin is now very narrow, that they could actually not go along with a very progressive proposal. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah. I think the same thing that we said about the Senate now applies in some ways to the House, where the margins do get smaller. And on particular bills or pieces of legislation, members of one party or the other can be convinced to go with the others. So you can't always count on just having that majority and always getting. Vote counting will become very, very important. Lastly, now, as we move towards the end here to wrap up, I'd like to talk a little bit about what this election has meant or what impact it may have on the plasma protein therapeutics industry. In particular, our membership has been concerned and the patient community has been concerned with the 4 pillars and the Affordable Care Act, which provides some protections for pre-existing conditions, lifetime caps and things of that nature. As we see the Trump administration moving away, the leftover legacy of that may be the court case that's at the Supreme Court right now that could affect the viability and severability of the Affordable Care Act. That would have a big impact on both the patient community and on our industry. George, can you comment just a bit on where that stands and what you think will happen under a Biden administration?
Sure. Well, this is a case that, as you know, was brought by a number of state Republican attorney generals that was supported by the Department of Justice under President Trump. And actually, the case is being argued before the Supreme Court tomorrow. Obviously, the question of the new Justice Barrett and where she would be on the Affordable Care Act played a very central role or discussion in her confirmation hearings. As you look at that case, and this is sort of horribly simplified, but there are 2 things to really focus on. One of them is, does the court decide, as the Trump administration and the attorney generals have urged, to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act? And that would mean doing away with what's left of the mandate, but also, as Tom indicated, throwing out things like protection against pre-existing conditions, guarantee issue, but also it would pick up things like biologics, which are provided for in the ACA, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, CMMI would get tossed overboard. So that's the first question. Will the court go so far as to throw out the entire Affordable Care Act? The second question is, if they decide, for example, that the mandate must go, there's a question of severability, and that is, do these other pieces that are not integrally related to the mandate, such as CMMI, Medicaid expansion is a harder question, but the biologics and that, do they need to be thrown out as well, or can they be saved by the court saying, no, they're severed? Congress would have enacted those anyway. They are not integrally related to the mandate. So those are the things to look out for. As far as the Trump administration is concerned, I think 2 things. One is, you hear from time to time saying, well, if Biden wins, he'll just end the lawsuit. You can't end the lawsuit because it's not his lawsuit. It was brought by the state Republican attorney generals. Theoretically, he could have the Department of Justice pull its support, but that's kind of closing the barn door after the horse is left, because the briefing and the arguments will all be done. And the court will be on its way towards making a decision. But there are lots of things that President Biden could do through executive action. He could, for example, continue and expand enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. He could restore funding for encouraging people to enroll. Lots of steps like that he could take short of having to horse through some large-scale changes to the Affordable Care Act through Congress. Along those veins, he could probably take actions to rescind President Trump's orders and regulations concerning mini-med or skinny plans and things of that nature. But as for the larger scale issues, the public option, Medicare for all, it is difficult to see, short of Democrats fully running the table, and even then, it is difficult to see those big types of changes being enacted over the next couple of years.
Okay. Tim, any comments on ACA or the broader impact issue?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we've ignored is that we're still working from our homes, that this is election under COVID, and that the impact on the industry and the policies still may reflect some of the fact that we're still waiting on the biotech industry to produce a vaccine. And I think that the nature of very tight margins in the House and Senate will still lead to a lot of partisan fights that will be very difficult. I think that going back to your original question, which is the ACA, that I think that the likelihood is that the ACA under a Biden-Harris administration would be protected and upheld, and the protections for pre-existing conditions and other pieces would obviously be held in firm tact and probably built on, especially again going back to the COVID point, that's with the rising unemployment and many folks having the need for coverage. So I think that's just one other wild card to add to the many that we've highlighted here that may play a factor.
Okay. Thank you. Just in my closing comments, in looking at what a Biden administration versus a Trump administration might look at from the 30,000-foot level, a lot of the things I think that were included in H.R. 3 that was passed in the House, you can sit back and look and say, could be the drawing board or the sketchboard, the playbook going forward in a Biden administration. Some of those things, such as eliminating the non-interference clause that's in Medicare, allowing the government to negotiate drug prices, is something that I think will continue to be an issue. Whether or not they can get Senate Republicans, if indeed the Senate goes Republican, to go along with that, I think today they're closer to that than they were 2-3 years ago. So it's something that needs to be watched and addressed. But all of those types of issues that are in H.R. 3, I think will be amplified in the Biden administration, and that the pharmaceutical industry writ large will certainly have to deal with. The plasma industry is a little bit different because these products are non-interchangeable, and so will look probably to be exempt from some of those plans. But in the larger context, the environment is going to be just as difficult, I think, certainly for the plasma industry under a Biden administration as it has been for the Trump administration. So with that, any last comments, Tim?
No, I think it's going to be a tenuous couple of weeks, but I I think that, as a whole, this country really came out to vote, and I think that that's a great thing from a civic responsibility piece. And I think that, the contested election piece, there might have some more clarity over the next few weeks.
Okay. George, any thoughts?
Just fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be a ride.
It is going to be a bumpy ride. Well, thank you both, Tim, George Olsen, Williams, and Jensen. Thank you as always. With that, we'll wrap up the PPTA post-election coverage. And thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, Tom.